Hi, I'm Rachel, and I'm here to wrap up my Maybe Midrash Readathon from last month. The Maybe Midrash Readathon was started by booktubers Steve Donahue, Jason at Old Blues Chapter and Verse, and Felicia at Little Prairie Library. I'll link to their channels down below, as well as my personal announcement video. The Maybe Midrash Readathon challenged readers to pick up a book of fiction and a book of nonfiction pertaining to any world religion. And I chose Judaism because it's kinda in my wheelhouse. I read for nonfiction Here All Along, Finding Meaning, Spirituality, and a Deeper Connection to Life in Judaism After Finally Choosing to Look There by Sarah Hurwitz. And for fiction, I read Invisible as Air by Zoe Fishman. Midrash in the Jewish tradition is people commenting on the Bible, a tradition that continues to this day. But I decided not to focus on the Bible for this and instead centered on the experiences of modern Jewish American families. And I've teased a couple of nuggets out on that theme from these two books that I'd like to talk about. Just a quick disclaimer, I'm not an authority on Judaism. These are just my opinions from a semi-informed perspective. I do read a lot of Jewish books, and I am a bat mitzvah, hey, from a million years ago. And I even occasionally attend adult education classes at my synagogue. Though even if I do get more involved with the religious community, I think I'd like to keep my status as semi-informed. Reminds me not to get too cocky and that learning is a lifelong endeavor. But anywho, all of this is discussion fodder for another time. Here All Along is basically Sarah Hurwitz's treatise to adult Jews that there's more to the religion than simply being bored out of your mind at your twice-a-year high holiday services. But Invisible as Air more or less exists in that latter reality. Teddy Snow is the child of interfaith parents, represent, who is dragged by his mother into having a bar mitzvah, out of her sense of largely unexplored duty to Judaism. Teddy is miserable and doesn't see the point to any of this. He's dealing with a lot as the death of his sister 3 years prior is taking a continued toll on his parents and himself. He ends up doing his bar mitzvah project, which is a community service-based project, at a retirement home, where he shares his beloved movies with the residents. Teddy turns to movies. He's a movie buff and especially loves their happy endings. He gets close to one particular resident, Morty, and they end up talking about such topics as death and loss, tradition, and manhood. Well, I don't believe in him or her or whatever you want to call it, and that's why my bar mitzvah just seems so ridiculous. Like, what's the point? Read from some roll of paper in a language I don't even understand to somehow prove that I'm a man? And who's a man at 13 anyway? I barely have pubic hair. Teddy blushed, not quite believing the words that were tumbling out of his mouth in this spare apartment that smelled like leather and garlic. He had thought all of these things, but he had never said them out loud before. Well, that's more than I needed to know, said Morty. He cleared his throat. Listen, a bar mitzvah can be a lot of horseshit, sure. I've been to parties where parents forked out thousands of dollars just so that they could look important. But I was bar mitzvahed, and my father and his father and his father, you see? My dad isn't Jewish, said Teddy, just my mom. Okay, same difference. Well, not really, said Teddy. Women have only been bat mitzvahed since 1922. I looked it up. Morty shrugged. The point is, it's a tradition. It's about saying, you know what, I've studied until my eyes crossed, I've dragged my ass to Hebrew school more times than I can count, and for what? To honor my forefathers and my foremothers by reading the same Torah they did, Vador Vador. You know what that means? No, said Teddy. Continuity, Morty replied, generation to generation. But what does that have to do with God? Asked Teddy. What am I, a rabbi? Asked Morty. Teddy sighed. Listen, do I think God really gives a shit whether you get a bar mitzvah or not? Said Morty. No, but I think the ritual brings you closer to God just because for this year, this important year, when you're on the precipice of puberty, it forces you to make your Judaism a priority. When you'd rather be doing anything but studying the Torah or sitting here listening to an old-timer like me jabber your ear off, here you are, talking about God. See? Maybe I'm thinking about God, but that doesn't mean I'm any closer to believing, said Teddy. How come you believe? I can't tell you, kid. It's just a feeling I have, said Morty. Or maybe it just gives me hope to believe. After Bernice died, I had a tough time with God. I thought, how could this be? And I still do. I always will. But there's been enough beauty and joy in my life, before and since, to keep the idea of him or her alive. Teddy looked at Morty in his black tube socks and plastic slides and just didn't know. He wasn't sure what he wanted as proof of God's existence. Maybe a burning bush? But he wasn't buying it. And what's this whole becoming a man, becoming a woman thing about? He asked Morty. I feel like my childhood ended for me when my sister died 3 years ago, when I was 9. Fair enough, Teddy, but let me ask you this, said Morty. When you were 9, when you were forced to stare death in all of its unfairness right in the face, did you have the wherewithal to ask these complicated questions, or to think the thoughts you're thinking now? No, Teddy admitted. So there you go, manhood in a nutshell, along with a couple of other unmentionables, obviously. It's time. Your forefathers knew it was time, and so you put on a jacket and a tie, and you read from the same script they read from, and you have a nosh, and that's it. Next chapter. So there's a lot to unpack here. Coming from the Hurwitz school of thought, it's a shame that Teddy and Morty don't see any deeper value to the tradition right on its face. Once again, most Jews just don't delve in that deeply. I'm also a little hesitant of the I'm doing this because my ancestors are argument, even though that's a strong part of my own personal identity too. But I guess what I mean is it's a stepping stone for me. Going back to that earlier argument, it just doesn't go deep enough. And it's a bit exclusionary to converts or Jews by choice. And just to go on a tangent, I mean, there's so many varieties of Jewish expression anyway. Like, I came from a very assimilated Jewish family, so I always feel on the outs whenever my fellow Jews talk about things like the Yom Kippur breakfast at their parents' house with all the family gathered around or stuff like that, because that'll never be my experience. I think the argument that sticks out most to me, the one that Morty makes, is about meaning coming from experience. You put in all of this work into a bar or bat mitzvah, even when you don't want to, and it brings you closer to the idea of a larger reality. God and community and even loved ones lost. 13 is also an age where you can start to examine these matters more complexly. I'll caveat a bit again into personal experience because unlike Teddy, I wasn't dealing with the loss of someone close to me at such a young age, but the year before my bat mitzvah was perhaps the hardest year of my life. I had a bit of a breakdown, I was seeing some doctors, I was on some pills. For a while it wasn't even certain if I would be able to go through with it. But over that summer, I actually did put my pedal to the metal. I did all of the learning. I led a lot of the Shabbat services, and I learned by Torah and Haftorah parts, wrote my Devar Torah, and so forth. And for me, I think it was an act of struggling through something and coming out the other side. I mean, not magically cured of all that ailed me, but sort of ready to try being human again. And it's strange to think about because at the time I was a lot like Teddy. I was just doing this because my mom wanted me to. Judaism didn't mean much to me. But I returned to Judaism when I was 18, and I think about that experience that I actually had what you might consider to be an authentic growing up bat mitzvah experience after all. And that's what feels like Judaism to me. We're supposed to wrestle with things, and there aren't any easy answers. The bar or bat mitzvah isn't about the party or the gifts. It's about taking that step into a larger world. And you know, even if Teddy isn't, say, on his way to becoming a rabbi or anything, the ceremony is still an induction into growing up. Life rituals are a big part of Judaism. From here, I thought we'd skip ahead to the last one, death. Well, not so much our own deaths because Judaism is a little murky on the afterlife. But we do put a lot of stock into how we mourn our loved ones. In Invisible as Air, Teddy's parents self-medicate to deal with their loss. In Here All Along, Hurwitz uses a personal anecdote to talk about Jewish rituals. Just a quick FYI for context, Hurwitz works as a political speechwriter. A few years ago, at a conference, I took part in a small group exercise in which each participant gave a brief presentation on an issue they cared about. As we went around the table, people spoke about a variety of topics: new technological developments, public policy problems, speech writing techniques, me obviously, and the room buzzed with the back and forth between the presenter and the rest of us. We then got to a man who looked to be in his 40s and had been sitting quietly, barely blinking behind his thick-framed glasses. After hesitating for a moment, he took a deep breath and said, "The truth is, my mother passed away about a month ago, and I'm having a really hard time right now." In an instant, the energy in the room shifted as everyone fell silent and leaned in closer. "I know I have a lot of anger and grief I need to process," he continued, "but I haven't figured out how to do it, so I'm just keeping busy, kind of avoiding it." He continued in this vein for the rest of his 3 minutes. When it was time to offer responses, after saying how sorry I was, I told him about the traditional Jewish mourning rituals, how for 7 days after we bury our loved ones, we do something called sitting Shiva. During this time, we don't leave the house, go to work, or do the usual daily tasks of life. Instead, our friends and community come to us and form a loving circle around us, sitting with us as we grieve, helping with cooking and errands, and joining us for daily prayer services as we say the special mourner's prayer called the Kaddish. After the Shiva is over, we can return to work if we like, but we don't resume normal life. Judaism understands that we need time to transition back into a world that hasn't stopped turning just because our loved one is no longer in it. So for 30 days, we continue to say the Kaddish every day, but we now do so at a synagogue or elsewhere, often with others who have lost loved ones. If the deceased was a parent, the mourning period lasts an entire year, and we say the Kaddish daily for 11 of those 12 months. In addition, every year for the rest of our lives, we mark the anniversary of our loved one's death with special rituals to honor their memory. When someone we love dies, we may feel as if the world we know has been shattered and we're suddenly forced to live in a new world of which we want no part. And when everyone is telling us that we need to be strong and get it together and act like everything is okay, Judaism says, no, actually, you are not okay, and you may feel this way for quite a while. And though you will slowly heal and eventually find your footing, this loss will always be with you. This will always hurt in some way. The secular world might expect us to act like nothing has happened, but Judaism certainly doesn't. Rather, it lays out a process that gives us the space to fully feel and express our grief, and that guides us forward, gradually helping us re-enter our life and learn to live it again without the one we love. The guy's eyes lit up. "That's what I'm missing," he exclaimed. "That's what I need. Some kind of ritual to get me through this." I think the secular world often thinks of religious rituals as restrictive. They strip away our individuality or humanity. But I think for most religious practitioners, this is not at all the truth. These rituals give us the space to fight and feel through our emotions. And the secular world doesn't often do that. Death is such an awkward topic, and it shifts the tone in the room. We spend our days at work or with the PTA like Teddy's parents do in the novel. And we can't always properly grieve with these people. It's not considered appropriate with casual acquaintances. The rituals, again, help people create that space and provide those involved with a bit of a roadmap. And just to end on a note about the actual deceased, Judaism does have rituals for that as well. Maybe the most beautiful one to me personally is the ritual of Tahara. Several years ago, I read a novel on this topic, Washing the Dead by Michelle Brofman, where this was a major character arc for a deceased mother and her estranged daughter. Hurwitz describes the ritual thusly. For centuries, Jews have prepared the dead for this kind of burial with a ritual known as tahara, which means purity, and involves washing and dressing the body. Tahara is done by specially trained volunteers who are members of the synagogue's or community's Chevra Kadisha, which means Holy Society. As historian Deborah Lipstadt points out, the name Holy Society, rather than merely burial society, reflects the high esteem in which members are held. Tending to the deceased is one of the holiest mitzvot we can perform. It is considered the truest act of kindness, one that can never be repaid by the recipient. When someone dies, a team of Chevra Kadisha members is assembled. Men tend to the bodies of men and women to the bodies of women. The team gathers, usually in the funeral home where the body has been sent, puts on protective gear, and says a special prayer for the deceased. They then gently and meticulously wash the body, right down to cleaning the dirt out from under the person's fingernails, and ritually immerse the body in water or pour water over it. Various prayers are said throughout the process. As I read descriptions of the Tahara ritual, I was struck by the reverence and tenderness that Hevra Kadisha members bring to their work. They never turn the body face down. When they need to wash someone's back, they turn the body on its side. They do not pass anything over the body. If they need to hand something to someone across the table, they walk all the way around. They also take great care to respect the modesty of the deceased, ensuring that the body stays covered at all times and only uncovering the particular part they are washing and then immediately recovering it. And once they have finished, they recite a prayer asking the deceased for forgiveness for any inadvertent distress, offense, or embarrassment they may have caused. Those tending to the body seem to be treating the deceased as if they are somehow still there, aware of what is happening to them. Some Hevra Kadisha members even believe the souls of the dead are present, and they see their role as helping those souls transition from this world to the next. Others speak of the process as being similar to caring for a newborn baby. Just as we lovingly wash, swaddle, and soothe babies when we welcome them into the world, helping them adjust to this new way of being, we do so for the deceased as they depart. It is an act that seemed impossibly intimate, said one rabbi about her experience with Tahara. I felt an outpouring of tenderness, she recalled, and she found herself thinking, "It's okay, dear. We're here. You're okay." All of this meticulousness is not about creating meaningless rules. It's about making sure that human life is honored. And again, making space for that emotional, spiritual reality of a world that is larger than ourselves alone. Which, brief caveat again, I personally think that, with regards to modesty, it's not about shaming people for their bodies. It's about recognizing that people might not want to be uncovered. It's often a sign of dehumanization to see naked, dead bodies. And also that person is no longer really in the room to give consent. I mean, I know there's a lot of talk about God in these passages, and people have various opinions, but for me personally, I've tried to keep it more centered on the idea of that bigger reality, because that's more or less where my beliefs are, that there's not like a literal man in the sky saying things, but that these speak to this bigger shared reality and this idea of communal empathy, which to me is God. So that about covers it for me now. You can find links to all of the Goodreads reviews for the books I mentioned down below. Thanks so much to Steve, Jason, and Felicia for thinking up this invigorating readathon. I enjoyed watching other videos, and I look forward to hopefully participating again next year. I'll be back in a couple of days to talk about my Friday reads. In the meantime, thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.